This is the third part of the story about Moses and is called The Great Escape. Moses and Aaron went to visit the king of Egypt. God wants you to set his people free, they announced. But the king just laughed. Don't be silly, he said. They do what I tell them. They work for nothing. I will never set them free. Then I must warn you, said Moses. God will make some very bad things happen until you change your mind. It started almost at once. The rivers of Egypt filled with blood. The houses of Egypt swarmed with frogs. The dust of Egypt turned into gnats. But the king would not let God's people go. The people in Egypt were covered with flies. The animals in Egypt grew sick and died, and ugly sores broke out on everyone. But still the king would not let God's people go. Hail pelted the land and broke down the crops. Locusts gobbled up what was left. Then darkness like night fell for 3 whole days, and still the king would not give in. Finally God sent an angel to kill the king's eldest son and the eldest sons of the rest of the Egyptians. Then at last the king said, Go, go and never come back. God's people cheered. God's people packed. God's people waved goodbye. But just as they reached the sea and were puzzling out how to get across, the king changed his mind. He leapt into his chariot and led his army out after them. Soon the sea stretched out before God's people, and the Egyptian army rushed behind them like a wave. What could they do? Raise your special walking stick, God whispered to Moses. And the sea split in 2 before them, leaving a path right down the middle. The people of Israel hurried along that path to the other side, the Egyptian army close behind. Just as the last of God's people had safely crossed, Moses lowered his stick, the waters rushed back, and the army was washed away. God's people were free at last.